The X-Men film timeline is one of the most confusing and overly written sequence of films to ever be produced.
Let us go talk to the professor.
McAvoy or Stewart? These timelines are so confusing.
Countless continuity errors and rearranged character events still confuse casual viewers to this day. But how did it get this way? And why? Basically, to make a long story very short, it's to make sure two sequels never happened. X-Men 2000 and X2 2003 are still viewed to this day as amazing superhero films, if not dated. It wasn't until the third installment, X-Men Last Stand, and the subsequent prequel spin-off X-Men Origins Wolverine that many people began to have issues. Many viewed those films as unwatchable and flat-out bad movies, and thus, when the time came around for a new line of prequel films following the X-Men at the start of their careers, they decided to change a few things. In short, they used their prequel films to change the history and alter the timeline, but only to ensure that X3 and X-Men Origins never happened. X-Men 1 and X-Men 2 could still stay in their own narrative canon. Changing history so that the first two films in your series stay the same, but the second two are retconned, was never going to be a straightforward mission. Nevertheless, it's what happened, and people have been confused ever since. However, at long last, and after much painstaking effort, I've finally managed to trace the timelines. The Last Stand timeline, where all the original sequels still happened. Main events include Professor X dying. The First Class timeline, where the prequels happened and the sequels never did. Main events include Mystique dying. And the Days of Future Past timeline, where only the first two X-Men films happened, but not 3 or Origins. Main events include Professor X being resurrected. Now with that all laid out, you can finally watch the films and decide which timeline you truly desire to be the main one that is canon. You've got 3 different variations to choose from. Now with all this information in mind, here's the supporting evidence why each timeline cannot exist within the other ones. The First Class timeline and the Last Stand timeline cannot exist in the same space because Mystique dies in Dark Phoenix, thus cementing that this is its own separate entity, as she is present in both X-Men 2000 and X2, and also X3. Logan can technically be present in both timelines due to a fan theory. Essentially, if you believe Logan is in the Last Stand timeline, it is because there's an implied after-credit scene where Professor X's consciousness travels into the comatose body of his twin brother, this explaining how he's back alive despite dying at the hands of Jean Grey in X3. If you want to believe that Logan is in the Days of Future Past timeline, it is because that film changed history so that X3 never happened and Professor X was never killed.
Everybody got that?
Now here's the hardest part about Logan being in the Last Stand timeline. The Wolverine ends with Logan having his adamantium claws removed by the main villain of the film. However, in the film Logan, we can clearly see his metal claws again. Thus, Logan and the Wolverine really can't exist in the same space, and more or less serve as alternate endings to the same timeline. However, things get even more complicated due to a fan theory being confirmed as true. Both the Wolverine and Logan are directed by the same guy, and in the film The Wolverine, a psychic predicts that Wolverine will die with his heart in his hand.
So what did you see?
I see you on your back. There's blood everywhere. You're holding your own heart in your hand.
A fan theory posited that this was actually in reference to the ending of Logan, where he's holding his daughter's hand. The director said that this theory is in fact true. However, due to the claws being different, it's really hard to grasp this as true. The problem continues as the Wolverine is also supposed to be canon with Days of Future Past. In an after-credit scene, Logan still has his bone claws, but later in future scenes of Days of Future Past, he has metal claws once again. When asked about this, the director of Days of Future Past said that Magneto gave Logan his metal claws back. Since this was not plainly stated in the film and was only said in a very brief magazine interview, I don't think it's 100% common knowledge, and thus it kind of has to be treated as gray area canon. For now, I will leave Logan and the Wolverine separate so you can choose how you want each timeline to end. I personally believe the Deadpool films are in the First Class timeline, as the McAvoy version of Professor X is in Deadpool 2, and Deadpool films take place in modern times. It would only be the next natural progression after Dark Phoenix. Deadpool also can't be in the Last Stand timeline because a version of his character dies in X-Men Origins, and yes, he is revived in an after-credit scene, but the origin is completely different, so let's just say he's a different character altogether. And lastly, the First Class timeline and the Last Stand timeline have to be separate because Patrick Stewart can walk and still use his powers as an older man, meanwhile McAvoy lost his ability at a younger age. The final point I want to mention is the latest addition to the X-Men film's New Mutants. It is revealed halfway through the film that it takes place either slightly after or during the events of Logan, making it the last film chronologically in the timeline. It can exist in both the Last Stand timeline and the Days of Future Past timeline without issue. However, the main problem is that the characters reference joining the X-Men as if they're still currently around. By the time the events of Logan happen, all the X-Men are dead due to a psychic accident at the hands of Professor X. Does this mean that New Mutants is an entirely new and separate fourth timeline? Or did the creators finally get overwhelmed by their own canon? I think the answer is obvious.